So today I want to talk about the future, and Jack has set me up nicely for this, and the challenges our species will face for sustainability, and perhaps, our ability to even stick around for a while. And the thing is, it lies in the unknown future, and possibly like what we see in this spooky, foggy road in Oregon. We don't know what's up there, right? So I'll suggest that a transformed way of thinking about adaptation might help us get through the long, sustainable future. Oh, I don't have to do that. So this is my rendering of the now familiar global temperature anomaly time series, and you've no doubt seen this lots of times. I'm going to provide a somewhat different take on it today, I think. Sustainability is ultimately about the future, right? And the future is, by definition, a world we haven't yet experienced. In a stationary environment, where the mean and the variance are the same despite long-term variability, optimizing your decision-making based on your past experience is a sound policy, right? But in a non-stationary environment, doing so can be a disaster. Non-stationary environments create what the psychologist Robin Hogarth called a wicked learning environment. In such environments, lessons that we learn from the past don't necessarily help us perform better. The economists John Kay and Mervyn King note that when the learning environment is wicked, and I quote, "The application of the mathematics of probability is questionable and the results are ambiguous." In other words, in uncertain, wicked learning environments, maximization of something like expected utility, right, which is the gold standard, the primary tool of decision theory and economics and planning, it's not going to do us much good. We live in a time of non-stationary change, and when we optimize, we're adapting to the past. Our own Bill Barnett in EBS has noted that we're bad at identifying transformative technologies before they do their transformation. Optimization and consensus approaches may get you incremental improvement, but they're not going to yield the transformations that we need to achieve sustainability. So let me talk to you about my weird definition of adaptation. It's not weird if you're a biologist, but it's weird if you're a sustainability scientist. My working definition is that adaptation is the process by which individuals or communities become better suited to their environments. Adaptations are solutions to persistent problems presented by the environment broadly construed. So it's an engineering definition. Finches with thicker beaks, finches with thicker beaks can access the hard seeds that are the only thing that's around for food when you have a protracted drought, okay? And so this is a much more general definition of adaptation than is typical in the literature, but I think that this is its strength. It suggests that we can embed our climate change adaptation into a much broader context and the enormous historical success of human adaptability broadly construed. So when selection creates biological adaptations, it changes the variation that exists in a population by amplifying those variants that are best suited to the engineering problems posed by the environments. In these schematic distributions here, we go from a wide, relatively low distribution, spread out, lots of variance, into one that's shifted considerably to the right, and it's more peaked. There are more finches with thick beaks following the drought. They've solved the engineering problem, and they've amplified this particular solution. It's an adaptation. Now, this logic leads to the first evolutionary lesson on adaptation. I've got 3 or 4. As an aside, I'll just say that this is the most important one. This is the one that matters the most. If you don't remember anything from my talk, remember this. If you want to adapt, you have to have diversity. Diversity is the fundamental building block of adaptation. Okay? Fisher's fundamental theorem of natural selection tells us that the rate of change in fitness as a function of selection is equal to the variance in fitness. What that basically means, if we translate that into something more broadly understandable, is that the rate at which a population can adapt is limited by the number of candidate solutions to some persistent environmental problem. I know what you're thinking. When we think about human adaptations to climate change and other challenges for sustainability, we're typically imagining something a little more complex than a single phenotypic trait like the finch's beak. Many of our species' most important adaptations are not strictly biological, they're cultural. And by culture, I mean learned behaviors that can be transmitted from one person to another. Right? Well, so fortunately for us, there's a highly sophisticated theory of cultural evolution that just so happens to have been developed here on the farm. The mathematical foundations were laid down by Luca Cavalli-Sforza and Mark Feldman, and Mark and his students continue to innovate in this area to this day. And then Bill Durham documented the many ways that transmitted cultural information makes human populations better adapted to the wide variety of environments where our species lives. Everything I talk about from now on relates specifically to cultural evolution, and in particular, in my own research interests, the ways that social organization affects transmission of potentially adaptive traits. All right, lesson number 2. The first one is diversity. The second one, standing variation beats directed innovation for adaptation. Okay? It always does, at least in the model world. And it's not hard to see that this is actually a corollary of the first one, right? That standing variation, you have more variation, you can adapt faster. A really excellent analysis of this phenomenon comes from Laurel Fogarty and her colleague at the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig, Anna Kandler. Laurel was a postdoc here at Stanford with Mark Feldman. And here's a plot. What we're plotting is essentially the adaptation success, kind of broadly, against the fitness benefit, which is essentially how good the adaptation works. The better it works, the faster it spreads, the more easily it's adopted. But what we see is that we've got de novo innovation and we've got standing variation in every condition. Using mathematical and computational models, they show that adaptation to environmental crises is much more likely when it comes from standing variation than when it comes from directed innovation. And this insight is super important for the types of non-stationary environments that we live in and the environmental challenges that we face today and into the foreseeable future. All right, the third lesson, cultural hegemony is bad for adaptation. Quick poll, who knows what hegemony means? Everybody? Almost no one, okay. I was warned about that, and I was like, no, come on, no. It's when one group has power over another to impose their will, essentially, okay? So evolving systems change in the direction of the highest fitness variant, and there's a lot of technical stuff behind this that I've tried to spare you of. And so like any greedy optimization algorithm, the state of the system follows the gradient of steepest descent. You go up the fitness surface. Okay? Rapid change in response to strong selection creates a problem, though, for adaptive capacity. Essentially, you eat up all your variation, and while you might be adapted to the present case, you leave yourself vulnerable to the future because you've eaten up the sort of fuel for future adaptation. I think that this is likely to be particularly problematic for cultural systems because it's not just, unlike genetic inheritance, ideas can be transmitted by broadcast methods in addition to person-to-person transmission. So for example, if you have a multi-billion-dollar corporation that has extensive marketing budgets, they can influence mass adoption. The idea of coca-colonization that was depicted on this cover of Time magazine in 1950, when it was thought to be a pretty exotic idea, is about the globalization of American culture. And the power asymmetry between the US and many other parts of the world means that practices, products, and ideas get adopted in many populations, even though they're not very good for them, because of this cultural hegemony, because of the power differentials. Not only do you wind up with a suboptimal solution for the local populations, but you eat up the variance, right? You essentially drive out local variations on these types of things. So the solution to this problem, other than something like revolution or changing the global economic system, is promoting community structure, fostering weaker, more organic ties between subpopulations. What local structure does, it allows the ideas and solutions to be tinkered with and modified to local preferences. You turn off the cultural fire hose, and you allow local solutions to flourish, and the overall diversity in the system increases. And so here is a network. Marcel Slauthe and I developed a bunch of these a number of years ago. And this is a highly structured network. This is about as structured as you can imagine. And by structure, I mean that if we were to pick a random edge in this graph, it would connect someone to a cluster, a within-group cluster versus a between-group cluster. So overwhelmingly, people are connected to within their communities here. And this is exactly the type of larger social structure that fosters the development of diversity. Okay, so we can see if we diffuse variants on this, they're going to diffuse locally. They're going to, when they get transmitted, because it takes longer to get transmitted from subgroup to subgroup, there's time for change to accumulate and percolate through. The overall system has greater diversity. All right, closing in on the last lessons. Related to this, innovation comes from the periphery. All right, so based on this previous work, classic debate in the diffusion of innovations literature is, do innovations come from the cores of societies or do they come from the peripheries of societies? And as you can guess from this slide, we come down pretty hard on the idea that they come from the peripheries. So here's the research team, my group, computational experiments led by my postdoc, Matt Turner, who's in the center on the bottom here, showed that innovations arising in peripheral populations are far more likely to spread to the whole population and to create adaptations when you have simulated environmental crises. So here is a network. We investigated populations that were composed of two main components: a large cohesive community that we call a majority population, because that's where most of the ties are, and a smaller peripheral community that we call the minority population. The next figures I'm going to show you are mind-numbingly hard to grok. I just want to draw your attention to the scales here. Okay, on the left we have minority adaptation, innovation. On the right we have majority innovation. And you'll notice that the scale is essentially double on the minority side. When innovations come from minority populations on the peripheries of these cohesive so this could be, right, our cohesive population, our big population could be a market-based state economy. These could be, and this is exactly the motivation for this kind of work, could be subsistence indigenous populations who are typically physically marginal and they're economically marginal. They're on the outskirts here, right? When the innovation comes from there, it's more than twice as likely to be adopted, essentially at all levels of the social structure. All right. An important lesson that comes from this, if these are where the hotbeds of innovation are going to be, and selection has a dark side too, right? Ernst Mayr referred to natural selection as non-random elimination. When we're talking about cultural evolution, when we're talking about human populations, this is not what we're looking for. We're looking for the amplification of solutions that work, not the elimination, all right? And so we need to think hard about ensuring the downside of innovation, particularly for vulnerable and small populations. And in a recent, Ann Pizer, who's in the middle here, and I organized a workshop at the National Socio-Ecological Synthesis Center on essentially subsistence populations and climate adaptation. We wrote a paper in Nature Climate Change arguing for the importance of indigenous and subsistence population autonomy in their adaptation efforts moving forward as a result of the logic of this, that these are likely to be innovative populations for adaptations of a particular type, right? Particularly related to livelihood and food systems. So playing in really nicely, I think, to Theo's work here. Just circling back to the beginning, adaptation is a wicked problem. The collected evolutionary lessons of adaptation suggest that we should be promoting diversity above all else in our potentially adaptive solutions. Under uncertainty, such as non-stationarity, there are different forms of uncertainty, but non-stationarity is a pretty important one. The name of the game is robustness, not optimality. We should increase our tolerance for non-optimal solutions to problems if they contribute to the diversity of approaches to those problems. We should pursue policies that promote diversity, that generate hybridity, that add innovative peripheries to cohesive cores, and that increase the autonomy for hotbeds of innovation. Popular approaches to societal problem solving, like effective altruism, where charities are ranked according to some criterion of effectiveness, and then donors are encouraged to only contribute to those that are ranked highest in the resulting league tables. At best, they miss transformative adaptive solutions. And at worst, they inhibit the incubation and emergence of novel adaptive solutions. While we can learn a lot about adaptation and sustainability by looking at adaptations of the past, and from economic and engineering analysis of efficiency and optimality, this isn't where the transformative ideas that we need to achieve sustainability are going to come from. The launch of the Stanford Doerr School of Sustainability has me feeling more optimistic than I've felt in years. I'm particularly thrilled about my proto department, Environmental Behavioral Sciences, where the focus on intellectual diversity, there's that diversity thing again, and working cooperatively to solve the big collective action problems that we have of establishing a new institution, and the biggest collective action problem of all, of achieving sustainability for our species and those we share the planet with, right, are the major priorities. I'm also really excited about the prospect of bringing in more people who recognize the fundamentally biosocial nature of sustainability problems. Together, I hope we can help imagine a shared sustainable future where we can continue to adapt to the new challenges and move beyond the solutions mired in the world that we've moved on from. Thank you.